A man sits at a low, heavy table in Capernaum, surrounded by the most hated men in the Roman Empire. And the room is deafening. Men who know how to suffer. They look at Jesus, passing the bread and laughing with traitors. And they are deeply offended. The leather will crack. The seams will rip open. So he has to make a choice. He must reject the wine to save the skin. He must ultimately kill the Messiah to protect the religion. Their resistance is not arrogance. It is terror. Jesus looks through the door and sees them standing there in the fading light. He sees how rigid they have become, how desperately they are holding on to their ancient fasting rules as the kingdom of heaven explodes right in front of them. He does not mock them. He knows what the pressure is about to do to them. But he also knows a devastating truth about human nature, a detail recorded by only one of the gospel writers. Hiding quietly at the very end of the scene, Matthew records the parable of the wineskins. Mark records the parable. But Luke writes the footnote. Luke is a physician. He looks for symptoms. He documents the human condition. And at the end of his account of this exact dinner party, he includes one final sentence, that Jesus speaks to the men standing in the dust. And no one after drinking old wine wants the new. For they say, the old is better. The old wine is smooth. The old wine is predictable. The old wine is safe. It does not hiss. It does not foam. They fast. The Pharisees fast. Why is he feasting? They ask a question that echoes through every generation, every denomination. It does not violently stretch the leather in your hands. It has finished its disruption. The chemical war is over. You can pour it into a clay cup. Drink it in the quiet of your home, and know exactly how it will taste on your tongue. The new wine is harsh. It is raw. It is still fighting to establish its shape. Jesus understands the human nervous system. He knows exactly why the Pharisees refuse to walk into that house. He knows why they cling to their heavy shawls and their Sabbath distances. The footnote is not an endorsement of their tradition. It is a diagnosis of their addiction. Jesus is stating a tragic, universal fact about human psychology. When a human being is presented with the volatile, expanding reality of God, and a predictable, settled, manageable religious system, they will almost always choose the system. They will choose the rules. They will choose the familiar. They will choose the dead leather. Because the alternative demands something they are unwilling to give. It demands that they lose control. The old wine lets you be the master of the house. The new wine threatens to blow the doors off the hinges. So they stand in the street, gripping their traditions, convincing themselves that the stale taste in their mouths is actually holiness. But this is not just an ancient tragedy. That exact same addiction did not disappear in the first century, and every era of religious history. Same question, again and again. Most people read this scene and assume it is simply a story. Look at your own life. Look at the structures you have built to contain the divine. If you have spent any significant amount of time inside modern Christianity, you know exactly what the old wine tastes like. You know the familiar smell of stale coffee and printed bulletins in the foyer. The solid, unyielding weight of the heavy oak pew beneath you. The predictable rhythm of a service that starts at 10 and ends precisely at 11:15. You have a theological framework that explains tragedy, defines morality, and sorts humanity into neat, manageable categories of who is in and who is out. You have created a container, and for a long time, that container kept you safe. It held your life together when things were chaotic, providing a rigid boundary against the unpredictability of the world. But then, something happens that does not fit the shape of your leather. Maybe it is a massive personal failure, a moral collapse that shatters your pristine image of yourself, leaving you desperate for a grace your rigid theology does not actually know how to give. Maybe it is a season of profound suffering, a medical diagnosis, or a sudden loss where all your familiar platitudes about divine plans, about Jesus being friendly to outcasts, they assume it is a gentle lesson about grace, about how God loves the marginalized, suddenly taste like dry, choking dust in your mouth. Or maybe God simply asks you to extend radical, table-sharing love to a person your political and religious tribe has specifically instructed you to hate. The pressure begins to build in your chest. The volatile fermentation of grace expands against the walls of your certainty. And in that exact moment, you face the crisis of Capernaum. You can feel the tightness in your throat, the terrifying realization that your current understanding of God is not large enough to hold what God is actually doing in your life. The fear you feel in that moment is not a lack of faith. It is the terrifying physics of expansion. But because the stretching hurts, because the loss of control is deeply uncomfortable, most of us do exactly what the men outside the dinner party did. We retreat. We grip our heavy traditions and step back into the dust. We double down on our rigid rules. We listen to the voices that tell us our boundaries are righteous. And we refuse to walk into the room where the wild, uncontrollable feast is actually happening. We say the old wine is better, simply because it is safe. But when you refuse to expand, about tearing down social boundaries so everyone can have a seat at the table. But it is not. Jesus is not offering a bumper sticker. When your container finally becomes too brittle to hold the life God is pouring out, He does not just leave you sitting comfortably on the shelf. The feast in Capernaum roars on. Jesus tears a piece of warm bread. The Pharisees stand frozen in the cold street. They grip their heavy shawls. They protect their tradition. They think they are surviving, but they are dying of thirst. They do not realize the terrible grace hiding in the metaphor they just heard. Look at the physical leather bag again. The pressure hits the unbending seam. The dry resin flakes apart. The heavy cord snaps. The hide violently tears open. The dark wine bleeds directly into the hot Galilean dirt. The container is utterly ruined. And when your theology becomes that brittle, God does the exact same thing to you. He does not negotiate with your rigidity. He does not pour slightly less grace just to keep your boundaries intact. He breaks the container. He shatters the structure. He tears the seam. He lets the dead leather burst. The bursting of your religious structure is not a divine punishment. It is a divine rescue. A faith that cannot stretch will eventually shatter. A theology that cannot expand will eventually explode. A heart that demands control will always lose it. About being open-minded. He is diagnosing something. He is naming a structural flaw in the human heart that most people do not even realize they have. So God lets the crisis hit. He lets the neat, manageable categories of your certainty collapse. He lets the walls fall down. You feel like you are dying. You feel the panic in your chest. You watch the wine of your life spilling into the dust. You scramble in the dirt. You grab the torn pieces of your old rules. You try to stitch the dead leather back together. You beg God to put you back into the small, safe box you used to live in. But you cannot stitch dead skin. The old Ascos is permanently ruined. And that is exactly what He wanted. God is not trying to destroy your faith. He is trying to destroy your limits. He is forcing you to become Kanos, new in nature. He wants a heart that expands when the wildness of His grace enters the room. He wants a spirit that stretches. When He invites the extortionist to the table, He wants a mind that yields when He moves in a way you did not predict. The rigid container had to die so the living vessel could breathe. The breaking hurts. The spilling feels like an absolute tragedy. But when you step back and look at the whole story, you realize the breaking was never random. The answer, He gives them a strange, brief metaphor about the leather bags used to carry alcohol, is actually a warning. Jesus stays at the table in Capernaum. The extortionists keep laughing in the crowded room. The dark wine is poured into clay cups, spilling over the edges, far beyond the careful boundaries the experts drew in the street dust. A king brings a feast of grace, and the religious experts refuse to walk inside. A leather bag hardens in the sun, and the new harvest demands a yielding skin. The wild yeast wakes up in the dark, and the violent pressure expands the boundaries of the vessel. The old leather refuses to stretch, and the unbending seams burst into the dirt. A physician writes a footnote, and a human addiction to the safe and familiar is diagnosed. A rigid system is shattered in the street, and a living, Elastic heart is formed from the wreckage. The Messiah eats with the untouchable, and the kingdom of heaven shatters the boundaries of human religion. Same wine, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the word kainos, not neos, not just a newer version of the same old leather. When God breaks your rigid categories, He does not just give you an updated set of rules. He creates an entirely different kind of vessel. If you are in a season where the safe, predictable container of your faith has suddenly ruptured and the wine is spilling everywhere, do not panic. Do not sit in the dirt and try to stitch the dead leather back together. And it changes how you read every confrontation He has in the Gospels. The real question of this dinner party isn't whether God loves sinners. Let the old boundaries break. The bursting is not a tragedy. It is a resurrection. And may the God who refuses to be contained by our carefully crafted rules give you the courage to let your old structures shatter and bring you out carrying a capacity for grace you could not have received any other way. If this opens something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is feeling the terrifying pressure of their own container breaking. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. It is this: what happens to your container when the pressure hits? When God does something that does not fit your categories, when He moves in a way that violates your carefully constructed theology, your system is going to be tested. You can hear the clinking of copper coins hitting wood, the sloshing of dark wine into clay cups. The religion of the first century was not a mistake. It was a structure. It was built to hold something precious. But Jesus is about to show them exactly what happens when you pour the raw, volatile reality of heaven into a vessel that has already stopped expanding. To feel the weight of this warning, you have to leave the theology behind for a moment and look at the physical object itself. When a first-century Judean heard the word askos, they did not picture a glass bottle or a wooden barrel. They pictured a dead animal, specifically a goat, to make an askos. A tradesman had to sever the head and the feet of a goat, carefully peel the skin off the carcass in one intact piece, and tan the hide over a fire. The neck became the pouring spout. The severed legs were tied off and sewn shut with heavy cord. The inside was thickly coated with pitch or pine resin to seal the microscopic pores of the leather. It was a brutal, physical process. This was the standard method for transporting liquids across the ancient Near East. From the trade routes of Egypt to the rocky hills of Galilee, the material was chosen for a very specific reason. Glass would shatter on the back of a donkey. Clay jars were too heavy and too fragile for the nomadic life of a shepherd or the constant movement of a Roman legion. Leather possessed a property that clay and glass lacked: the smell of roasted lamb mixing with the sweat of men who make their living by extortion. Elasticity. When the skin was freshly tanned, it was supple. It was pliable. You could press your thumb into the side of the bag and feel the material give way. A new wineskin is not a rigid container. It is a yielding boundary. It is designed to accommodate and surrender to whatever is happening inside of it. But leather does not stay soft forever. As the years pass, the punishing desert heat bakes the moisture out of the hide. The continuous cycle of filling and emptying, of being slung over shoulders and dropped into the dust, takes a heavy toll on the cellular structure of the skin. The collagen fibers stiffen. The pine resin inside dries out and begins to flake. Eventually, the askos reaches a point where it is permanently locked into its final shape. It becomes hard, brittle, and unyielding. It can still hold water perfectly well. It can still hold wine, provided that the wine has already completed its journey, finished its chemical processes, and settled into a quiet, predictable state. The Pharisees standing outside the door in Capernaum understood this perfectly. Their entire religious system began as a flexible structure. Centuries earlier, when their ancestors returned from the trauma of exile in Babylon, the law was a lifeline. It was a fresh, pliable framework designed to hold the identity of Israel together in a hostile world. But generation after generation added new rules, new traditions, and new boundaries to protect the old ones. The system hardened, The structure calcified into something brittle. It became a masterfully crafted ancient. He is not lecturing them. He is not demanding they go to the temple to purify themselves before they take another bite. He is just eating. Unyielding ascos. And an old wineskin is perfectly fine for holding old things. But Jesus is not talking about water. And he is not talking about wine that has already settled. He is talking about a chemical reaction that is just beginning. Workers crush the harvest in the limestone press. The juice flows down the stone channels. It is sweet, thick, and dark. The smell of crushed fruit fills the heavy autumn air. They funnel this raw, unfermented liquid into a newly prepared ascos. They tie the severed legs shut. They bind the neck tight with a heavy cord. And then, the violence begins. Fermentation is not a peaceful settling. It is a chemical war. The wild yeast on the grapeskins wakes up in the dark. It begins to devour the sugars in the juice. It converts them into alcohol. As the yeast feeds, it releases massive amounts of carbon dioxide gas. The gas expands instantly. The pressure inside the sealed leather bag begins to rise. You can actually hear it. The liquid hisses inside the bag. A dark purple foam bubbles violently against the seams. The gas pushes outward against the leather walls, demanding space. The skin stretches. It swells. It bulges outward, growing tight as a military drumhead. If you press your hand against the side of the bag, outside, standing in the dry street dust, a group of religious experts watches through the open door. The pressure pushes back against your palm. The container is being tested to its absolute physical limits. A new wineskin can take the abuse. It yields to the expanding gas. Its cellular structure stretches to make room for the life bursting inside of it. The container survives because it is willing to change shape. But pour that same volatile, living juice into an old wineskin. The exact same process begins. The yeast wakes up. The gas releases. The pressure builds. The carbon dioxide pushes outward against the leather walls with the same brutal force. But the leather does not yield. The collagen fibers are locked. The resin is dry. The walls are brittle. The force inside the bag has nowhere to go. The pressure hits the unbending boundaries of the old container, and the physics are unforgiving. The leather cracks. The seams rip apart. The entire skin bursts wide open with a violent tear. The dark red wine spills directly into the street dust. It sinks into the dirt. Ruined. The container is destroyed. The wine is wasted. Both are lost. Jesus sits at the table in Capernaum and looks out the door at the Pharisees. He looks at John's disciples. They are asking him why his disciples are not fasting. They are the Pharisees. Men who have spent their entire lives building fences around the law of God to keep it safe, to keep it clean. They want him to conform. They want his new movement to abide by their ancient fasting rules, their Sabbath laws, their rigid boundaries of who is clean and who is unclean. But the kingdom of heaven is not a static theology. It is a violent fermentation. He is not bringing an updated set of religious rules. He is bringing a living, expanding, uncontrollable reality, and their container cannot hold it. But to understand exactly why it cannot hold it, you have to look at the specific words Jesus chooses to speak next. Matthew chapter 9, verse 17. Jesus is concluding his response to the religious experts about fasting, and he delivers the punchline. In English, it reads like a simple repetition. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst. The wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No. They pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. It sounds like he is just using the word new twice, but the Greek text contains a shift that the English language completely flatlines. The word Jesus uses for the wine is the Greek adjective neos. It appears throughout ancient literature, and its primary meaning is new in time, recent. A freshly minted copper coin is neos. A young person is neos. They do not see a celebration inside that house. They see a contamination. The holy is mixing with the profane. The wine in the metaphor is neos. because it was literally just squeezed from the grape. It is fresh, young, and active. But when he speaks about the container required to hold that wine, the word shifts. If peeling back the English translation to see the architecture of the Greek text is stirring something inside you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So look at the precise words Matthew records on the page. Jesus does not say they pour Neos wine into Neos wineskins. He says they pour Neos wine into Kainos wineskins. Kainos does not just mean recent in time. It means new in quality, new in nature, unprecedented, never seen before. It is the exact same word Paul uses in 2 Corinthians when he declares, if anyone is in Christ, he is a Kainos creation, not a better version of the old self, an entirely different species of human. It is the word John uses in the book of Revelation when he writes, I saw a Kainos heaven and a Kainos earth. This distinction changes everything about the conversation at the dinner table. When Jesus tells the Pharisees they need a Kainos wineskin, and it isn't just the Pharisees watching in the dust. The disciples of John the Baptist are there, too. He is telling them that their ancient, calcified religious structure cannot just be updated. It cannot be slightly modified to accommodate his teaching. The container they have built over centuries is fundamentally incapable of holding the reality of the kingdom of heaven. The vessel God requires is not an updated religion. It is a resurrected heart. The new wine requires an entirely different kind of container, a vessel defined not by its rigid boundaries, but by its capacity to expand under pressure. But to the men standing outside that door in Capernaum, watching Jesus eat with extortionists and traitors, this is not just a theological disagreement, it is a threat. The sun drops lower over the Sea of Galilee, and the shadows stretch long across the dirt road in Capernaum. Outside the doorway, the Pharisees do not move. They grip the heavy fringes of their woven shawls. They feel the cold evening wind coming off the water. They listen to the deafening laughter of the extortionists inside the house. And their chests tighten with an anxiety they cannot even articulate. Most people read the Gospels and assume these men are simply arrogant hypocrites, cartoon villains dressed in religious robes, but they are not. They are tragic figures. They love the law of God. They bled for the law of God. Centuries earlier, when foreign kings brought pigs to the temple altar, these are men who have starved themselves in the desert waiting for the Messiah. Men who know how to mourn and tried to slaughter their religion. It was the ancestors of these men who took up swords. They fought in the caves. They died in the dirt. They built a massive fortress of rules around the Torah so that the faith of Israel would never be compromised again. They enforced the fasts. They maintained the purity. They measured the exact number of steps a man could walk on the Sabbath. They created the perfect, unyielding askos, and it worked for a long time. But what happens to a man who spends his entire life making sure he never crosses a boundary, never touches a corpse, never eats with a sinner? His heart becomes the container. His soul takes the permanent shape of his rules. He becomes safe, and he becomes hopelessly brittle. Now, the new wine is here. Jesus is pouring out something wild, something raw, something that forgives the unforgivable and eats with the untouchable. The pressure is rising inside the house. The fermentation of grace has begun. To Jesus, this expansion is the arrival of the kingdom. But to the men standing in the dust, it feels like the end of the world. When your entire relationship with God is tied to the exact shape of your container, any expansion feels like destruction. If a Pharisee admits that God is in that room, sitting at that table, sharing bread with a Roman collaborator, his entire theological framework shatters.